November 28, 1944. The Western Pacific lies calm beneath a moonless sky. Only the low hum of diesel engines breaks the silence. Deep beneath the surface, an American submarine glides through black water. Her name, USS Archerfish. Inside, red lights bathe the narrow steel corridors. Sweat beads on faces. Every man knows the risk of surfacing in enemy waters this close to Japan. The captain, Commander Joseph F. Enright, peers through the periscope, a faint silhouette on the horizon. Immense, slow-moving, guarded. At first, it seems like an aircraft carrier, but its size, it's monstrous, larger than anything ever seen. Enright's voice is quiet. Battle stations. Target bearing 085. The submarine turns. Torpedo tubes flood. In the stillness of the Pacific night, 40,000 tons of Japanese steel move unknowingly into the crosshairs of a single American hunter. The order comes. A whisper before history changes forever. By late 1944, the Pacific Ocean had become the largest battlefield on Earth. For more than 3 years, Japan's empire had stretched from the jungles of Burma to the islands of Micronesia. But now, that empire was collapsing, burned, bombed, and blockaded into retreat. The United States Navy, rebuilt after Pearl Harbor, had turned the tide. Its carrier task forces struck deep into Japanese territory. Its bombers leveled cities, and beneath the waves, its submarines hunted without mercy. Every week, tankers, freighters, and destroyers vanished beneath the sea, victims of silent American predators. Armed with torpedoes that finally worked, Japan's problem was not courage, it was exhaustion. Factories struggled without fuel. Convoys sailed without protection, and the Imperial Navy's proudest ships had become symbols of a dying power. The Yamato, Musashi, and Shinano, massive warships born from Japan's secret super battleship program, represented the nation's faith in steel supremacy. Designed before the war, they were the largest ever built. Over 70,000 tons of armor and guns meant to crush any American fleet that dared approach. But by 1944, their purpose no longer fit the war they faced. The age of the battleship was over. Aircraft carriers ruled the seas now. Fast, flexible, and deadly at a distance. Japan, realizing too late, tried to adapt. In hidden shipyards at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, engineers worked around the clock to transform one of these super battleships, Shinano, into a floating fortress of the skies. She would be the largest aircraft carrier in history. Armored like a battleship, her hull laid down beside her sister ship, Yamato, years before. Yet the effort came in desperation. Allied bombers were now striking the Japanese homeland. The Imperial Navy could no longer protect its own waters. Still, the belief persisted that a single colossal ship could change the war's course. Meanwhile, under those same waters, another kind of fleet was reshaping naval warfare entirely. The U.S. Submarine Force, a small, often overlooked arm of the Navy in 1941, had become one of the most efficient killing machines of the war. Only 2% of American sailors served beneath the sea. Yet by 1944, they had destroyed over half of Japan's merchant fleet. They operated from Midway, Guam, and Saipan, striking the sea lanes that kept Japan alive. Each submarine was a world of its own. 70 men confined in steel for weeks, living with the smell of oil and machinery, the constant pressure of the deep, and the silence of waiting. Commanders were young, aggressive, and independent. Their success depended not on numbers, but nerve. Among them was Joseph Francis Enright, a thoughtful but determined officer who had once lost command after failing to find targets in earlier patrols. Now, in late 1944, he was given a second chance aboard a newly commissioned Yamato-class submarine, USS Archerfish, SS-311. Enright's orders were simple. Patrol the waters south of Honshu, between Tokyo Bay and the Philippine Sea. It was a quiet assignment, a region near the heart of enemy territory, but with few opportunities. He could not have known that within days, his submarine would encounter a target beyond any imagination. Far above him, in the same dark sea lanes, the Japanese Navy prepared to transfer its newest creation, the Shinano, from Yokosuka to Kure. She was unfinished, undercrewed, and secret. Only a handful of officers even knew her name, but she was the last hope of a navy running out of both ships and faith. The two vessels, one the largest warship ever built, the other a single American submarine, were now unknowingly set on intersecting courses, and in the cold Pacific night ahead, history would prove that size, power, and pride could mean nothing against silence, patience, and precision. By November 1944, the men of the U.S. submarine force had developed their own world beneath the waves, one of isolation, intuition, and unspoken trust. They lived weeks without sunlight, breathing recycled air heavy with diesel and sweat. Every sound mattered. Every vibration could mean discovery or death. Their mission: starve Japan into submission by sinking everything that floated. But even in that relentless campaign, there was hierarchy among hunters. Some submarines, like Tang under Richard O'Kane, had already achieved legendary status. Others, like Archerfish, were still unproven, a new name among veterans. Commander Joseph Enright, age 35, carried both ambition and regret. 2 years earlier, he had been relieved from command after a disappointing patrol aboard the USS Dace. His career nearly ended there. But the Navy, desperate for capable officers, gave him another chance. Now, aboard Archerfish, he was determined not to waste it. Enright drilled his crew hard. Silent dives, battle stations, torpedo loading, and surface evasion. To his men, he was calm but demanding, a leader who believed discipline was survival. They knew the Pacific was unforgiving. A single error, a periscope raised too long, a noise in the hull, could bring a rain of depth charges and a steel coffin as their grave. Above them, in the world they could not see, Japan was rushing a miracle to sea. The massive carrier Shinano had been laid down secretly in 1940 as the third Yamato-class battleship, meant to rival anything afloat. But after Midway, Japan's catastrophic carrier losses forced a desperate change of plans. In a bold redesign, Shinano was converted mid-construction into a supercarrier, an armored floating airbase capable of carrying 47 aircraft. Protected by armor thick enough to withstand 500-pound bombs, she displaced more than 70,000 tons, dwarfing even the U.S. Navy's Essex-class carriers. No ship like her had ever existed, or ever would again. But speed, secrecy, and pressure would become her downfall. Tokyo demanded she be moved to the Kure naval base for final outfitting as soon as possible, fearing American bombers might destroy her in dock. Her crew was barely trained. Many compartments remained unfinished, watertight doors untested, and pumps incomplete. Still, on November 28, 1944, Shinano left Yokosuka under heavy secrecy, escorted by destroyers Isokaze, Hamakaze, and Yukikaze, a fragile shield for the largest ship on Earth. She carried nearly 2,400 men, engineers, and workers. Most had never sailed such a vessel before. Orders were to proceed slowly, 18 knots at most, hugging the Japanese coastline under cover of darkness. At the same hour, more than 100 miles south, the Archerfish prowled the waters on a fruitless patrol. Enright had been tracking rumors of enemy convoys, but found nothing. His fuel was running low. His patrol was nearly over. Still, he decided to stay surface that night, scanning the sea for anything unusual. Around 8:45 p.m., his radar officer reported a faint contact to the north. A slow-moving, distant echo. At first, Enright assumed it was a small convoy or patrol craft, yet the radar signature didn't fade. It was steady and enormous. He ordered the sub to shadow the target from a distance, staying just close enough to track its bearing. As the hours passed, he realized the target was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The contact filled the radar screen. Unbeknownst to Enright, the Shinano's officers had spotted his periscope hours earlier, but dismissed it as debris. Their radar was incomplete. Their lookouts, exhausted from the ship's rushed departure, failed to detect the submarine's persistence. Two vessels, one a symbol of Japan's industrial pride, the other, an American underdog, now began a slow-motion duel across the night sea. Neither crew yet understood the scale of what was unfolding. To the Archerfish men, it was another opportunity, a possible score before heading home. To the Japanese officers aboard Shinano, it was a routine transfer, just another voyage between naval bases. But in the invisible theater beneath the waves, fate was aligning history's largest warship with one of its smallest hunters. Within hours, their destinies would converge in silence. A 70,000-ton Titan and a 1,500-ton submarine locked in a single, decisive encounter. In an age when aircraft ruled the seas, Shinano stood as the last monument to a vanished era. A ship conceived in confidence and born in desperation. She began her life not as a carrier, but as a battleship. Her keel was laid in May 1940 at Yokosuka, alongside the might of Yamato and Musashi. The trio was to be Japan's answer to America's industrial strength, behemoths that no enemy gun could sink. Each carried 9 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval artillery ever mounted. But after the disaster at Midway in 1942, where 4 Japanese carriers were destroyed in a single day, the Imperial Navy faced an unthinkable truth. The age of the big gun was over. Japan's leaders made a fateful decision: to halt Shinano's construction and transform her into a carrier, one that could withstand the blows that had destroyed their earlier fleet. What emerged was an engineering paradox: a carrier built with the armor of a battleship. Her flight deck was sheathed in armor nearly 8 inches thick, her sides and decks layered with steel designed to shrug off bombs and torpedoes. She displaced over 72,000 antisins, tons fully loaded, more than twice the size of an American Essex-class carrier. Her design included massive fuel tanks, workshops, and magazines to support extended operations far from shore. On paper, she was invincible, yet beneath the armor, fatal flaws hid in plain sight. Her watertight compartments were unfinished. Damage control systems were incomplete. Her pumps lacked the capacity to handle major flooding. The conversion had been rushed. Japan could no longer afford time. Allied bombers threatened every port. Engineers worked under pressure, often through the night. Without proper testing, Shinano was the largest warship ever to sail. But she was also unfinished. And in war, unfinished meant vulnerable. She represented more than technology. She was a symbol, Japan's last expression of naval pride. To those aboard, she was a fortress of hope, a promise that the empire still had the power to fight back. But in truth, she was already obsolete, a steel relic of a strategy that the world had left behind. The human angle, Archerfish, and the men beneath the waves far, below that same ocean. 70 American sailors lived inside a world of confined silence. The USS Archerfish. The submarine was 311 feet, sleek and deadly. Her Yamato-class design allowed her to dive beyond 400 feet, with 6 torpedo tubes in the bow and 4 in the stern. But technology alone didn't win underwater. Men did. Commander Joseph F. Enright had something to prove. His earlier failure had haunted him for 2 years. Some men might have carried bitterness. Enright carried focus. To his crew, he was quiet but exacting. The kind of officer who studied enemy patterns, tides and weather before making a move. His executive officer, Lieutenant CMDR John Field, kept morale steady. The crew trusted Enright's calm. He never shouted, never panicked. Life aboard Archerfish was a ritual of patience. Days passed in the hum of engines and sonar pings. Men slept inches apart, their bunks surrounded by torpedoes. Every meal tasted faintly of oil. When submerged, the air grew heavy. The smell of metal and sweat mixed with fear. But fear, too, became routine. They had trained for this kind of night. Radar contact, slow pursuit, silence. Each man knew his role. Sonar operator, torpedo mechanic, radar watch, helmsman. The entire submarine functioned like a living machine. One mistake could expose them to the enemy's destroyers and turn the Pacific into their grave. Still, there was a quiet confidence aboard Archerfish. They had learned that beneath the sea, patience was a weapon. A submarine could wait hours, even days, for one perfect moment. That night, as radar tracked the massive unknown contact, Enright's instincts sharpened. He had seen convoys, tankers, even small carriers, but nothing this size. He began recording data: course, speed, bearing. Slowly, methodically, he closed the distance. To the men in the control room, the contact was still a mystery. But something about it felt different. It moved too steadily, too slowly, and carried the unmistakable confidence of a major warship. In the darkness, the Archerfish followed. Every adjustment was deliberate, a dance of shadow and steel. Inside, time stretched thin. Each hour brought them closer to discovery or destiny. Above, the crew of Shinano moved in ignorance, believing themselves safe under cover of night. Below, the men of Archerfish felt the rising tension, the kind that only silence can amplify. They didn't know they were stalking Japan's greatest warship. They only knew they had found something worth risking. Everything for. The Pacific night was calm. The kind of calm that amplifies every sound. At 9 p.m., Sadiputsminfuan San Stunfuan 5 Brown from Fadonbild. November 28, 1944, Archerfish maintained radar contact on the massive unknown target. Commander Enright had been tracking for nearly an hour. Each return pulse from the radar screen told him the same thing. This was no ordinary ship. He ordered the submarine to stay surfaced. Running on diesel engines gave him more speed, and the darkness made it safe. For now. The crew whispered commands. The helmsman made minute adjustments to match the target's zigzagging course. For hours, the submarine shadowed the giant, parallel and patient. At 11 p.m., the Japanese formation changed course again, turning southeast. Enright realized the vessel might be bound for Tokyo Bay or Kure. Either way, he would have one chance, maybe two, before dawn exposed them. He plotted the intercept, using paper, pencil, and instinct. Computers did not guide submarines then. It was human judgment that determined survival. Each bearing and range line drawn on the chart was a gamble of life and death. The Archerfish's crew remained alert, eyes fixed on glowing dials. The sonar operator whispered bearings like a heartbeat. When the massive shape finally came into visual range, Enright raised his periscope and froze. The outline was enormous. The flight deck stretched beyond the scope's frame. No cruiser, no battleship, something greater. He had no way to know it was Shinano. Intelligence hadn't even reported her existence, but his gut told him this target mattered. By 3:15 a.m., Archerfish had maneuvered into position, cutting ahead of the Japanese convoy's path. Enright ordered, "Flood all tubes." The submarine slowed to 3 knots, silent now except for the murmur of machinery. He checked the scope again. The silhouette loomed closer, filling the eyepiece. The target was less than 1/500 yards away. At 3:17 a.m., he gave the order. Fire 1, fire 2, fire 3, fire 4. 4 torpedoes left the tubes in succession, racing through the black water toward the largest ship, afloat. Enright dove immediately, the submarine slipping beneath the surface as crewmen listened for the sound that would mark history. 47 seconds later, the ocean thundered. 4 explosions rolled through the deep, distant, yet immense. Then came silence. Archerfish leveled out at 400 feet. The men waited for counterattack, expecting the hammering of depth charges, but none came. The destroyers above seemed confused, uncertain of what had happened. Enright didn't know it yet, but his torpedoes had struck true and mortal. Aboard Shinano, confusion followed the first shudder. At 3:19 a.m., 4 heavy detonations echoed through her hull. The ship lurched violently to port. Lights flickered. Men were thrown from their bunks. For a moment, disbelief reigned. Vice Admiral Toshio Abe, Shinano's commander, refused to believe his ship had been hit by a submarine. The escorts had detected nothing. The ship's immense size felt like protection itself. But water was already flooding in. Fast. The torpedoes had struck along the starboard side, below the armored belt. The hits ruptured boiler rooms and fuel compartments. Incomplete watertight doors allowed seawater to rush through passageways, spreading faster than the crew could respond. Damage control parties worked in chaos. Pumps failed. Many valves had never been tested. Compartments that should have been sealed were open, connecting lower decks like arteries. Within 30 minutes, Shinano developed a dangerous list. Abe ordered counterflooding to stabilize the ship, but without accurate reports, the measure only worsened the imbalance. By dawn, the world's largest warship was dying, not from superior firepower, but from the flaws of her own creation. The destroyers around her circled helplessly, watching a leviathan struggle against the sea. At 10:04 a.m., Abe finally gave the order to abandon ship. The list reached 30 degrees. The massive carrier rolled slowly onto her beam and slipped beneath the waves, barely 7 hours after being struck. Of her crew of nearly 2,400 men, more than 1,400 perished. The Shinano had never fired a shot, never launched an aircraft. She had sailed only once and never returned. Japan's naval command kept the loss secret. Only a handful of officers knew the truth. For weeks, even American intelligence remained unaware that such a ship had existed, let alone been sunk. There is a haunting symmetry in what happened that night. Shinano represented the height of Japan's wartime ambition, a floating fortress built to defy defeat. Archerfish was the opposite, small, unseen, and silent. When the two met, power and arrogance collided with patience and precision. A ship designed to survive the heaviest bombing in history fell to 4 unseen torpedoes from beneath the sea. It was not brute strength that decided the encounter, but the mastery of the invisible. The submarine's quiet hunt, the crew's composure, and Enright's instinct showed a new truth of warfare, that dominance no longer came from size, but from control, timing, and intelligence. Shinano's fall marked the end of an idea, that a single ship, no matter how mighty, could embody a nation's hope. For Japan, it was another wound in a war already lost. For the men of Archerfish, it was vindication, proof that silence could sink empires. And somewhere in that cold Pacific dawn, as oil and debris spread across the sea, a new age of naval warfare was confirmed, one where the unseen would always rule the surface. The sea that night was a black mirror. No moon, no stars, only the faint shimmer of phosphorescence breaking against the Archerfish's hull. Inside, red light painted the faces of men who had gone silent. The air was dense with tension. Not fear, but focus. For 6 hours they had stalked their prey. 6 hours of whispers, bearings, and sweat. Every man aboard knew they were close now. The target's radar trace grew stronger, larger, impossible to miss. Commander Joseph Enright stood behind the periscope, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Range, 2,000 yards," he said quietly. The helmsman repeated the order. The submarine adjusted its angle by a single degree. Nothing aboard Archerfish was rushed. Every command was calculated, precise, and silent. Above them, Shinano steamed at 17 knots, her massive hull cutting a white wake through the dark. The destroyer escorts, Isokaze, Hamikaze, and Yukikaze, scanned the sea half-heartedly, their radar unreliable, their crews exhausted. None expected an attack so close to Japan's shores. Enright saw the silhouette through his periscope. Immense, steady, outlined faintly by the night's haze. He could not identify the ship, but he felt it. This was something different. He checked again. 2 island structures on the deck, a flight deck wider than any he had ever seen. It wasn't in the recognition manuals. Whatever it was important. He took a breath. Stand by to fire. In the forward torpedo room, men pressed close to their stations. The silence was absolute. They could hear their own breathing. Tube 1 ready. Tube 2 ready. The sequence repeated until all 4 forward tubes were primed, flooded, and armed. Enright made the final adjustment, a perfect lead angle. Target bearing, 095 degrees. Range, 1,400 yards. Speed, 17 knots, he whispered. Fire 1. A soft hiss followed, the torpedo leaving the tube like a ghost. Fire 2. Fire 3. Fire 4. 4 wakes streaked through the darkness, invisible beneath the waves. Seconds stretched like hours. The crew watched the stopwatch, counting down the run. 40 seconds. 45. Then the deep rolled with thunder. The first explosion hit aft, near Shinano's starboard quarter. A flash tore through the sea, followed by 3 more. Heavy, hollow detonations that shook the submarine even at depth. Good hits, Enright said calmly. He ordered, "Dive! Take her down to 400 feet." Motors whined. Valves groaned. The boat tilted downward. Within moments, Archerfish disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed by the blackness of the Pacific. They waited. Above, chaos erupted aboard Shinano. Men stumbled through corridors filling with smoke and seawater. Damage reports flooded in. Boiler rooms breached, power flickering, communication lines severed. But below, the submarine crew could only listen. The sound of distant machinery, faint sonar pings, and the ominous creak of pressure against their hull. The destroyers had begun their search. "Depth charges coming," whispered the sonar man. A moment later, the first concussions rippled through the water, muffled thuds that rattled bolts and light fixtures. Enright kept his composure. He ordered the boat deeper. 430 feet. 450, each descent pushed the hull closer to its limit. The steel groaned like a living thing. More explosions followed, closer this time, rolling through the deep like underwater thunder. Dust fell from the pipes. Instruments shook. The men gripped handrails, silent, waiting for the next one. Then, nothing. The sea grew still again. For 30 long minutes, Archerfish stayed motionless. The sonar operator heard the faint rumble of propellers receding, the destroyers moving away. The enemy had lost them. Enright finally gave the order. Level off. Hold position. The crew exhaled for the first time in an hour. They had survived the counterattack, but didn't yet know what they had destroyed. At dawn, Enright surfaced carefully. The sky was pale gray, the horizon empty, no enemy ships, no sign of pursuit, only an oil slick spreading wide across the sea, thick, black, and glistening. He logged the engagement, marked the coordinates, and radioed headquarters a simple message. 4 torpedo hits. Target believed sunk. The transmission vanished into the ether. 1 calm. Report in a war of chaos. No one aboard Archerfish could imagine that they had just sunk the largest warship ever built, or that history would remember their calm precision as one of the most extraordinary naval victories of the Second World War. Below them, the Pacific was silent again, but in that silence, 40,000 tons of steel were dying. The first explosion struck Shinano just after 3:19 a.m., a deep metallic roar that rolled through her hull like a heartbeat gone wrong. Lights flickered, machinery groaned, and the vast ship, 70,000 tons of steel and pride, shuddered violently. Vice Admiral Toshio Abe, standing on the bridge, steadied himself against the railing. For a moment, he thought it might have been a boiler malfunction or an accidental detonation. Then came the second blast, heavier, closer. 4 hits in all. The ship began to list to starboard. Within minutes, alarms echoed through the decks. Damage control teams rushed to their stations, but many compartments were incomplete, ladders uninstalled, bulkheads unfinished. Some hatches lacked gaskets entirely. The first reports arrived, grim and confused, flooding in the engine rooms, compartments C and D open to the sea. Water rising fast, Abe ordered, "Counter-flood port side tanks." The command went out, but execution lagged. Many valves had never been tested under pressure. Some refused to turn. Others leaked. Shinano's speed fell to 10 knots. Pumps sputtered, losing power. Men scrambled through the narrow passageways, knee-deep in rising seawater, struggling to seal bulkheads that had never been properly fitted. Electricians fought to keep the generators alive. The lights flickered between white and red, casting shadows across the chaos. By 4 a.m., Shinano was taking water faster than her pumps could expel it. Her massive size, once a source of invincibility, now worked against her. The volume of flooding was too great to isolate. The torpedoes from Archerfish had hit precisely between her armored belt and the unarmored lower hull. 18 vulnerability created during her rushed conversion. 1. Exploded near the starboard engine room, another near aviation fuel tanks. Fires began below decks, hidden behind bulkheads. The smell of burning oil spread through the ship. On the bridge, Abe remained outwardly calm. His officers, pale and exhausted, looked to him for orders. The escorts circled anxiously, their sonar unable to detect the retreating submarine. At 5 a.m., Shinano's list increased to 10 degrees. Damage reports became desperate. Pumps were failing entirely. Men fought with buckets, hoses, anything that could slow the sea. The ship's medical bay filled with injured crew, burned, scalded, or struck by falling debris. Still, orders were to keep quiet. No distress signal was to be sent. The voyage remained classified, the ship's identity secret. Even in disaster, Japan's naval command insisted on silence. As dawn broke over the Pacific, the full scale of the damage became undeniable. Seawater reached the hangar decks. Planes and fuel drums shifted violently, slamming into bulkheads. The carrier listed 15 degrees. Vice Admiral Abe faced an impossible decision: beach the ship on the nearby coast, or continue hoping repairs might hold. Pride won the argument. He believed the Shinano could survive, that a ship of her size could not possibly sink from 4 torpedoes. But below, the situation was already irreversible. At 7 a.m., the list reached 20 degrees. Men slipped and fell as the deck tilted beneath their boots. Flooding reached the engine compartments. The ship's heart was dying. Crewmen abandoned repair efforts to save others trapped below. Some compartments were sealed with men still inside, a cruel necessity to slow the flooding. Voices shouted through the steel corridors, echoing against rushing water. By 8:20 a.m., the destroyer Isokaze pulled alongside, ready to take on survivors. But Abe still refused evacuation. He ordered all hands to keep fighting the flood. The sea, indifferent, rose higher. At 9:30 a.m., the Shinano listed 25 degrees. Her giant propellers lifted halfway from the water. The escorts moved in close, helpless to intervene. The end came quietly, not with an explosion, but with surrender. At 10 a.m., Abe gave the order. Abandon ship. Thousands of men poured onto the tilted deck, sliding into the oily sea. Some clung to debris, others jumped clear of the rolling hull. Engines roared one last time as the ship heeled to starboard, her bow lifting, her stern sinking beneath a cloud of steam and smoke. At 10:57 a.m., the Shinano disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed whole by the same waters that had carried her out of Yokosuka just 17 hours earlier. In her wake remained an oil slick nearly 5 miles wide and the cries of men scattered across the sea. Vice Admiral Abe went down with his ship, standing on the bridge as it vanished. Only 1,079 survivors were rescued by the destroyers. More than 2,400 men perished. The world's largest warship, a vessel designed to resist the fiercest bombing, had been destroyed by a single submarine it never even saw. For the U.S. Navy, the victory was still unknown. For Japan, the loss was too shameful to acknowledge. Official records listed Shinano as sunk in training operations. Her name was erased from public reports. Yet beneath the Pacific, 1,400 souls and 70,000 tons of steel rested in silence, a monument to pride, haste, and the quiet power of the unseen. When the waters of the Pacific finally calmed, the sea erased its evidence. The oil slick faded with the tide, and the waves rolled as though nothing had happened. For Japan, that illusion was vital, because the truth was unbearable. The sinking of Shinano struck at the very heart of the Imperial Navy's pride. She had been the largest, most secret warship ever constructed, meant to restore morale after years of relentless defeat. Now she was gone, destroyed on her maiden voyage, within sight of home before even entering combat. In Tokyo, news of the disaster arrived cautiously, whispered through secure lines to the Naval General Staff. Vice Admiral Abe was dead. His escorts had rescued barely 1,000 survivors. The rest had vanished beneath the sea. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, chief of the combined fleet, ordered total secrecy. No public announcement, no press release, no word even to most officers. Only a small circle of senior admirals learned the truth, that Japan's final superweapon had perished in a single night. The reasons were obvious. Morale across the nation was already crumbling. American B-29 bombers now roamed over Tokyo. Cities burned nightly. The Imperial Navy had been reduced to fragments of its former strength to reveal that its greatest ship, the Pretty pinnacle of Japanese engineering, had been lost. Before firing, a shot would have been devastating. So the loss of Shinano became a forbidden subject. Her name was stricken from records, her blueprints locked away. Even many of her surviving crew were reassigned without explanation, forbidden to speak of what had happened. The U.S. Navy, meanwhile, remained unaware of the magnitude of what it had accomplished. Commander Joseph Enright and his crew aboard Archerfish filed their patrol report like any other. 4 torpedo hits. Large carrier, approximately 800 feet in length, sunk. In Pearl Harbor, the report reached Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the U.S. submarine force. The claim seemed exaggerated. No carrier that size existed, according to U.S. intelligence. Analysts assumed Enright had overestimated. Perhaps he'd hit a converted tanker or escort carrier. For months, the truth remained buried. Japan's secrecy was so complete that no American reconnaissance photo, no intelligence intercept, hinted that a massive new warship had ever been launched. Still, Enright's confidence never wavered. He knew what he had seen, the sheer scale of the target, the explosions, the oil slick. Something enormous had gone down. As Archerfish returned to port, the crew celebrated quietly. They had survived another patrol, made solid hits, and escaped unscathed, achievements enough for any submarine. But Enright's instincts told him it was more than that. He spent hours refining his report, calculating ranges and target size from radar data and periscope observations. The evidence pointed toward one conclusion. This ship had been larger than any carrier previously known. Still, without confirmation, the sinking remained officially unverified. In wartime bureaucracy, extraordinary claims required extraordinary proof. It wasn't until months later, after Japan's surrender in August 1945, that American naval officers, combing through captured Japanese records, made a stunning discovery. Among the documents from the Yokosuka naval arsenal lay detailed construction logs for a massive vessel, IJN Shinano, converted from a Yamato-class hull, completed November 1944, lost November 29, 1944, south of Honshu. The coordinates matched perfectly with Enright's patrol report. In that moment, the magnitude of Archerfish's victory became clear. One submarine, on her first patrol under a redeemed commander, had destroyed the largest warship ever built, and done so with 4 torpedoes in a single night, without even knowing her name. News spread through the submarine fleet with disbelief, then pride. In the silence of the Pacific, a handful of men had achieved what no surface fleet or air armada ever had. They had erased a giant from history. When the truth reached Pearl Harbor in late 1945, the reaction was disbelief, followed by astonishment. For months, Commander Joseph Enright's report had sat in the files of the Pacific Fleet as just another victory claim, one among hundreds of sinkings logged that year, but the captured Japanese records changed everything. Sank, submarine that had been dismissed as overconfident, had, in fact, accomplished the impossible. The Archerfish had sunk a ship that outweighed her by nearly 50-1, the largest warship ever constructed. A vessel that had taken 4 years, tens of thousands of men, and Japan's final reservoir of steel to build, had been destroyed by a single patrol submarine in one encounter lasting 7 hours. When the news was confirmed, Admiral Lockwood sent for Enright personally. The tone was different this time. Lockwood had once doubted his claim. Now he shook his hand and said simply, "You did it. You really did it. For Enright." It was Vindication. The man who had once been relieved of command now stood, as the only submarine captain in history to sink a battleship-class carrier. The Archerfish's patrol was reclassified as extraordinary achievement. Every crew member received the Presidential Unit Citation, and Enright himself was awarded the Navy Cross. Yet the victory carried a solemn weight. In interviews years later, Enright would rarely boast. He spoke instead about the precision, the training, and the silence, how one act of patience had changed naval history. His men, he said, had done exactly what they were trained to do. Watch, wait, and strike only when sure. For the crew, life after war came quietly. They scattered back to homes across America. Farmers, teachers, engineers, carrying the memory of that night like a secret. Some spoke of it proudly, others never did. They had survived one of the most dangerous professions in the world and witnessed one of its greatest single moments. For Japan, the loss of Shinano became both a symbol and a warning. She had embodied everything the Imperial Navy believed in: size, armor, and the illusion of invulnerability. Her destruction, by contrast, reflected everything Japan had underestimated: technology, adaptation, and the changing nature of war. When American investigators later visited Yokosuka, they studied the unfinished sister projects and shipyard records. The findings were sobering. The conversion rushed, safety tests skipped, construction corners cut under air raid pressure. Shinano had gone to sea too early, too confident, and too secretive. Her death marked more than the end of a ship. It marked the end of Japan's grand naval dream. Within months, Yamato herself would be destroyed by American aircraft off Okinawa. The ocean that had once carried Japan's ambitions now became a graveyard for its empire. But history has a strange balance. While Japan's greatest ship vanished in secrecy, the small submarine that destroyed her earned immortality. The Archerfish's silhouette was later carved into plaques, painted onto museum walls, and etched into naval history as the hunter that sank the largest prey ever to sail. In time, both nations moved on. Wreck divers would never find Shinano. Her final resting place lies deep in the Philippine Sea, more than 1,000 meters down, still undiscovered, still whole in the silence of the abyss. But her story endures, not as a tale of defeat or victory, but as a lesson in the balance of war. Even the greatest machines, the most powerful symbols of empire, can be undone by the unseen, by a handful of men in a steel tube, waiting for the right moment. When Enright retired from the Navy years later, he kept a single photo in his study: Archerfish cutting across the Pacific, its crew smiling against the wind. On the back, in his handwriting, were just 5 words: "She did her job well." In the end, the sea keeps its secrets. Beneath thousands of feet of dark water, the Shinano rests untouched, a vast tomb of steel, oil, and silence. Above her, the currents flow as they did that night, indifferent to the ambition and fear that once passed through them. Her destruction was not just the loss of a ship, but the collapse of an idea, the belief that strength could be measured in size, in armor, in the weight of metal. For centuries, navies had built ever larger vessels, each meant to dominate the next. But in the cold hours before dawn on November 29, 1944, that tradition ended. A 1,500-ton submarine proved that invisibility, precision, and intellect could defeat mass and might. It was the quiet revolution of modern warfare, the shift from what could be seen to what could not. Archerfish's victory was not only tactical, it was philosophical. It marked the triumph of patience over pride, of adaptation over tradition. For the men of Japan's Imperial Navy, Shinano was supposed to be a resurrection, the embodiment of their nation's will to endure. Instead, she became a monument to human overconfidence, built in secrecy, rushed in desperation, and destroyed by the unseen. She was both a marvel and a warning. For Commander Enright and his crew, the story was different. They did not know the name of the ship they sank. They did not need to. They had done their duty, calmly, precisely, without spectacle. Their victory was quiet, like the ocean itself. Decades later, historians would call the encounter one of the most poetic moments of the Pacific War. The smallest hunter felling the greatest prey. A meeting of opposites that captured, in one night, the entire arc of human conflict, pride giving way to humility, noise replaced by silence. Today, when sonar sweeps the deep Pacific, it sometimes returns an echo, faint, massive, still. Perhaps it is only the seabed shifting. Or perhaps it is the ghost of the Shinano, reminding the world that in war, as in life, the mightiest fall not to fury, but to the patient hand that waits in the dark.